Welcome to the Primary Purpose Group of North Ocean City, Maryland. My name is Bob, and I'm an alcoholic. The following presentation is for newcomers to explain what we're doing here and why we're doing it. The original Primary Purpose Group was in Dallas, Texas, and they let us know that the program of Alcoholics Anonymous is not an intellectual challenge. It is a spiritual journey, and the big book is our travel guide. What we're going to do here is offer you a presentation of how the Primary Purpose Group works. It's necessary that you have a big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, like the one in the lower right-hand corner of the slide. We will get started with our foundation meeting, and all you need to do is have the book and an open mind. You'll hear a lot about the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. We'd like to let you know where to find the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. It's in the book, Alcoholics Anonymous, which is right in front of you. And if you have a third edition in the bottom right-hand corner of the dust cover, it lets you know that this is the basic text of the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. And if you have a fourth edition, it's right there in the center of the dust cover. The basic text is basically going to tell us what alcoholism is, what the solution is, and how to take the action that is necessary to avoid death or insanity by drinking. For example, to get from the problem to the solution. If we refer to page XI, that's Roman numerals, in the fourth edition, you can look at the beginning of the second paragraph there, first sentence, where it says, because this book has become the basic text for our society and has helped such a large number of alcoholic men and women to recovery, there exists strong sentiment against any radical changes made in it. We can now turn to page XIII, the foreword to the first edition. There at the top of the page, it says, this is the foreword as it appeared in the first printing of the first edition in 1939, when this book was published. The first paragraph reads as follows. We of Alcoholics Anonymous are more than 100 men and women who have recovered from a seemingly hopeless state of mind and body. To show other alcoholics precisely how we have recovered is the main purpose of this book. For them, we hope these pages will prove so convincing that no further authentication is necessary. We think this account of our experiences will help everyone to better understand the alcoholic. Many do not comprehend that the alcoholic is a very sick person, and besides, we are sure that our way of living has its advantages for all. So the first sentence tells us who authored the basic text of Alcoholics Anonymous. We of Alcoholics Anonymous are more than 100 men and women who have recovered from a seemingly hopeless state of mind and body. The second sentence, why they went to the trouble to publish the basic text. To show other alcoholics precisely how we have recovered is the main purpose of this book. The third sentence, the big book is all we will ever need to be successful in sobriety. For them, we hope these pages will prove so convincing that no further authentication will be necessary. The fourth sentence, the book is also for those who care about us. We think this account of our experiences will help everyone to better understand the alcoholic. Many do not comprehend that the alcoholic is a very sick person. The next sentence, the big book has given birth to over 200 anonymous fellowships that have nothing to do with drinking. And besides, we are sure that our way of living has its advantages for all. So in the foreword to the first edition, on the page we just read, we found out who authored the book, why they went to the trouble to publish the basic tests. It suggests that the big book is all we'll ever need to be successful in sobriety. The book is also for those who care about us, and the big book has given birth to over 200 anonymous fellowships that have nothing to do with drinking. Precisely. So there's no need to add to, take from, or rearrange any of the information that's being supplied to us in this book. Because they use words like precisely and specifically and exactly to describe the actions that we're going to have to take. And if you have any problems using any dictionary to find the words that they used in this 1939 printing, is extremely helpful. This is actually a dictionary that was published back then. Referring to the rest of the foreword to the first edition on page XIV, there are a couple of key sentences. The first is which, quote, the only requirement for membership is an honest desire to stop drinking, unquote. This is evident in our third and fifth traditions, which will be covered later. We have lost our understanding of honest by the time we decide to come to AA, so that requirement has been eliminated. But if a person is serious about living sober, they better have an honest desire to stop drinking and be willing to follow our directions. So tradition 3 and 5, which I just referred to, 3 would be the only requirement for membership is an honest desire to stop drinking. And 5 is each group has but one primary purpose, to carry its message to the alcoholic who still suffers. Now we can go ahead and move on to the foreword to the second edition on page XB. The foreword to the second edition is going to give us an historical account of the first 20 years of our history. It's going to tell us how Bill found Dr. Bob, how the two of those gentlemen realized that this wasn't a bad habit that they had, nor was it a lack of willpower that they needed to deal with. But what they had finally realized was it was a horrible disease. Then it'll go on to tell us how they got busy looking for other alcoholics to try to help, and how their success attracted the attention of leading citizens in the country, and how we received some very favorable publicity. This article was written by Jack Alexander and appeared in the Saturday Evening Post, and how the onslaught of new prospects forced Bill to develop the traditions of his ever-growing and mushrooming society. That growth is represented by 20,000 inquiries coming in from those articles and all of that attention that they were gathering, which brought on about 8,000 new members. So during this mushrooming effect, Bill recognized the need for guidelines for his organization, the code of conduct, and how people needed to behave, which all developed into the 12 traditions of Alcoholics Anonymous. So this brings us to the top of page XX, where they start telling us the result of the first 3 years of the organization. 50% of those who really tried never took a drink, and half of those who did drink returned and found permanent sobriety. So what it's telling us was 75% who had sponsors and who had followed the clear-cut directions in the big book were successful in sobriety. The Little Red Book was the first big book study guide that was ever published. It also supplied some topics for discussion meetings and gave assistance on how to read and understand the big book. Then in 1953, Bill published the 12 and 12. And by 1965, our success rate had dropped to 50%. Unfortunately, many newcomers are encouraged to try to use the 12 and 12 as their source of directions. Bill W. was the principal author of the big book and the sole author of the 12 and 12. On page 17 of the 12 and 12, Bill stated, "The big book was and still is the basic text for Alcoholics Anonymous." Then in the late 60s, we started discussion and participation meetings that failed to stick to our singleness of purpose. So by 1980, we had dropped to 33%. The result of which is we started ignoring the practice of focusing on our solution, and we drifted into group therapy. For recent years, our success rate has decreased to what appears to be less than 5% for those finding as much as 5 years sobriety. We refer to Bob Bacon's article and the information from The Price of Don't Drink and Go to Meetings and What Happened. Plus, we use intergroup stats and box 459 stats to bring you this information. While there has been dramatic change in our fellowship, the program has remained unchanged. Consequently, the 4th edition reads the same as the 1st edition. So the main results of all that ranting is as follows. If we deal with the issues, the problem remains unsolved. But if we take the steps, the problem is solved, and then the issues go away. They are removed. That's what the big book tells us. So we get to make a choice or a decision. We can choose the fellowship. On page 17, it says, quote unquote, but that in itself would never have held us together as we are now joined. Or we can follow the program of Alcoholics Anonymous as written in the big book, which has worked for well over 80 years. So now we'll turn to page 30 in the middle paragraph, where it says, quote, we learned that we had to fully concede to our innermost selves that we were alcoholics. This is the first step in recovery. You see, because in our heart of hearts, we must know that we are victims of a killer disease before we can ever begin recovery. So if we're going to have to recover, first we have to figure out what we're going to recover from. And that means, first, we have to define what the problem is. So if we're going to try to find out what the problem is alcoholism. And in the big book, we can read about that problem in the doctor's opinion, and in Bill's story, and in more about alcoholism. Once we learn about what that is, then we can find a solution. And in order to find that, we'll find out more about that in There Is a Solution and We Agnostics. So let's go back to page XXVIII, the doctor's opinion, and see if we can't find out what the problem is. Here, we get to identify who Dr. Silkworth was. He would be the doctor, and how he wound up at Towns Hospital. We're going to learn how his opinion opened the door for recovery. Because until we understand a problem, we cannot find a solution. It's like the example of walking out to my car, putting a key in the ignition, and the damn thing won't start. Well, there's my problem. Now I can sit on my butt and talk about the car not starting until hell freezes over, but that's not going to get me anywhere. So I look under the hood, and I see that the battery cable is corroded. I know what the problem is, so the solution becomes very evident. I need a new battery cable. But that doesn't solve the problem. I still must take the action necessary to obtain a new cable, replace the bad one, and now I'm on my way. Understand the problem, know what the solution is, and then take the action to make the solution a reality. First, we have to define what the problem is. Our problem is alcoholism. It's a problem with our body and a problem with our mind. When it has two or more ingredients, we call that a compound problem. Then we can find a solution. So to sum it up real quickly, he's told us that our problem is alcoholism. This problem is a compound problem. It has two main ingredients. There's a problem with my body, and that there's a problem with my mind. The problem with my body is that I have an allergy. I have an abnormal reaction to a food or chemical. In this case, it's alcohol. When I put alcohol into my system, there's an abnormal reaction. What is that abnormal reaction? Well, it's something that the doctor refers to as the phenomenon of craving. This is my reaction to that allergy. This is what my body does. And what my body does is when I put a little bit of alcohol into my system, it wants more. So after I have one drink, I think it's a great idea to have a second drink. And after I have a second drink, I kind of feel I really need to have a third drink. And after I have a third drink, that element of choice just seems to slowly disappear and becomes necessity. And I end up being thirstier after the fourth or fifth drink than I was before I ever took the first drink. Now this can be shown in many examples, but the greatest one that I've ever come up with is if you gave me a case of water and put it down in front of me and told me that I had to drink all 24 bottles of those waters, I don't think that I could do it. As a matter of fact, I'm pretty sure that it's humanly impossible for somebody to sit down and drink 24 bottles of water real fast. But if you gave me a case of beer and told me that I had to drink that case of beer, I wouldn't have any problem with it, and I'd probably get the task done extremely quickly, within a matter of hours. Now, I don't know why that happens, but I do know that that happens. And that explains what this phenomenon of craving is. It's just the necessity that my body has, once I start putting alcohol into a system, to always have more. And then I have some subconscious ways of finding what I need and making sure that it gets into my body. Like, for instance, have you ever tried Listerine or NyQuil to make you feel better? Or Vicks 44 cough syrup? How about vanilla extract? All these products have plenty of alcohol. Bay rum, bitters. How about going a different route? Well, The doctor prescribed them for me. Therefore, I really need them. Not to get into any conversations about what doctors are and are not prescribing, but if they're not prescribing this medication for you and you're taking it, or you're taking way more than anybody has ever prescribed to you, then you might want to take a look at that situation. So on the last paragraph on XXVIII, the doctor plainly states, and I quote, "Men and women drink essentially because they like the effect produced by alcohol. The sensation is so elusive that, while they admit it is injurious, they cannot after a time differentiate the true from the false. To them, their alcoholic life seems to be the only normal one. They are restless, irritable, and discontented, unless they can again experience the sense of ease and comfort which comes at once by taking a few drinks, drinks which they see others taking with impunity. After they have succumbed to the desire again, as so many do, and the phenomenon of craving develops, they pass through the well-known stages of a spree, emerging remorseful, with a firm resolution not to drink again. This is repeated over and over, and unless this person can experience an entire psychic change, there is very little hope of his recovery." So this is where we find the initial information regarding the unmanageability. The alcoholic mind that cannot distinguish the true from the false. So we'll carefully dissect the whole paragraph. First, what is the effect alcoholic men and women get from drinking alcohol? And why is it so important that we have this spiritual event occur in our lives? Well, Dr. Silkworth said that we drink essentially because we like the effect produced by alcohol. What is the effect an alcoholic gets from drinking? When we alcoholics had a few drinks, we were amazed at the change in the way we thought and the way we felt. A few drinks produced an entire psychic change. Let's go to page 83 in the big book and examine the 9th step promises by beginning each one of these promises with, "In the early days of my drinking, when I had a few drinks, I knew a new freedom and a new happiness." Did you? I sure did. When I had a few drinks, I didn't regret the past, nor wish to shut the door on it. Did you ever come out of a blackout at a place you hadn't planned on visiting, with people you hadn't planned on being with, and learned you had done some things that you sure wish you hadn't done? Because of the guilt and remorse. It was to be a secret, and then go into the bar and have a few drinks and tell some stranger the whole story? I certainly did. When I had a few drinks, I comprehended the word serenity, and I knew peace. Did you find that you had serenity and peace of mind that was replaced the turmoil of a few drinks? Oh yeah. When I had a few drinks, I didn't regret the past, nor wish to shut the door on it. How willing were you to share your life story with a poor drunk who had just had a really bad experience? I loved to talk about how bad my life was. When I had a few drinks, that feeling of uselessness and self-pity would disappear. With a few drinks, did you feel that you just might really have a purpose in this world and feel sorry for those critters that didn't have what you had, although you just weren't too sure what it was you had? Almost every time. When I had a few drinks, I had lost interest in selfish things and gained interest in my fellows. Did a few drinks make you a little bit more interested in people, especially of the opposite sex? Can I buy you a drink, honey? When I had a few drinks, self-seeking slipped away. Did a few drinks make you somewhat generous? Drinks for everybody. When I had a few drinks, my whole attitude and outlook upon life had changed. Did a few drinks take you from a gray, gloomy day to one that was bright and hopeful? From a shade of brown to rosy pink with just a couple drinks? When I had a few drinks, fear of people and of financial insecurity left me. Did you enjoy being in the company of people sober? Leave me alone. Did a few drinks diminish your concern for your financial difficulties? How am I going to pay all these bills? Think I better have a couple of drinks and figure it out. When I had a few drinks, I intuitively knew how to handle situations that used to baffle me. Did you too find that you were able to think much more clearly and wisely with a few drinks? You bet. I had answers to questions that hadn't even been asked yet. So now, let's turn to page 1, chapter 1, Bill's story. Essentially, we're being 12-stepped by Bill Wilson. He's going to tell us what it was like, what happened, and what it's like now. We'll notice on page 2, Lois is already pestering him about how much he drinks, when's he going to stop drinking, why can't he stop drinking, so on and so forth. On page 3, the physical aspects of his drinking start coming into play. He's getting jittery in the morning. The shakes are starting. By page 5, Bill comments that liquor ceased to be a luxury. It became a necessity. Now he's lying about his drinking. He's hiding bottles. He mentioned that he lost an opportunity to make some money because he drank. Then he made up his mind to never touch another drop. Then he came home drunk. On page 7, Bill met Dr. Silkworth and learned what was wrong with him. He got the intellectual aspect. That, he thought, would be the solution, but it wasn't. On page 8, in that first paragraph, Bill surrenders to the problem. He finally comments, alcohol was his master. This is step 1. By the next paragraph, he's raving about the simplicity of the program. In the first sentence, he's a broken man, and by the last sentence of that paragraph, it's all of a sudden a wonderful life as a result of taking the actions that Ebby described for him. On page 10 and 11, Bill talks about him rebelling at the idea of a spiritual solution. So all of a sudden, he now decides that he's agnostic and that this just isn't going to work for him. But by page 12, we hear about the freedom and responsibility that we're given to develop an idea of God that we can bet our own life on. When Ebby turns around to him and tells him, why don't you just come up with your own concept of God? All of a sudden, that changes the table. See, the simplicity of step 2 is that Bill saw his old drinking buddy, who was supposedly in the nut house for alcoholic insanity, and he was sober. Both of them had been powerless over alcohol, but Ebby was sober, and Bill was going to die. Ebby had found the power that Bill was unaware of. Ebby gave hope to Bill, the beginning of coming to believe. From that hope, Bill finally became willing to try Ebby's plan of action. So on page 13 now, Bill enters into Towns Hospital on December 11, 1934. He ends up taking step 3 on the 3rd day of his sobriety. Ebby visits Bill in the hospital on the 4th and 5th days to help Bill take the action Ebby had learned to apply to his life, the result of which was a spiritual experience. Bill left the hospital on December 18, 1934, at the end of 7 days, and lives 36 years without taking another drink. And we are here because of the action that Bill took, not the meetings he attended. We now identify the meaning of step 1. Powerlessness because of the allergy. Unmanageability due to the mind that cannot remember that we have the allergy. It can only remember the sense of ease and comfort which comes at once by taking a few drinks. Therefore, we are powerless over our body and powerless over our mind where alcohol is concerned. We are screwed. From the hope of hearing a recovered alcoholic tell their story of what they were like, what happened, and what they are like now, or reading the 44 stories in the Big Book, is the beginning of step 2. If lack of power is the problem, then a power greater than ourselves must be a solution. And we see that the recovered alcoholic has found that power. It takes no great mind to see that if a lack of power or powerlessness is my problem, then a power greater than myself must be the solution. Once I can see that, I'm faced with a very simple decision. Am I, or am I not, willing to follow the clear-cut directions for recovery? But I need someone who knows how to do this. So, the simplicity of step 3 is to ask the recovered alcoholic, will you be my sponsor? And be willing to do precisely what the sponsor tells you to do. To determine if you have made a good choice in sponsors, it's pretty easy to tell. If they tell you to open your Big Book to page XI and study to page 43, that is a good start. These 51 pages will get you ready to see if you are ready to move on. Look at the first sentence on page 44. It tells you why it is so important to be thorough in your study to this point. From this study, we can separate the alcoholic from the non-alcoholics, which is so vital to the success of your group and AA as a whole. Now, take the test. If, when you honestly want to, you find you cannot quit entirely, how many of you have promised you'd never drink again? Appears you failed to manage that decision, so your life is unmanageable where alcohol is concerned. Or, if, when drinking, you have little control over the amount you take, how many of you cannot start drinking without getting drunk? It would appear that you too are powerless over alcohol. Step 1. If that is the case, you may be suffering from an illness which only a spiritual experience will conquer. How many meetings must you attend to have a spiritual experience? Or how many steps must you take to have this blessed promise become a reality in your life? Page 44 through page 57 will open the door for you to be able to consider your own conception of God, of your understanding. Page 58 answers that stupid comment that we hear too often in the meetings. I don't know how it works. The first sentence tells us how it works. Rarely have we seen a person fail who has carefully followed the clear-cut directions in the Big Book. The program of Alcoholics Anonymous is a spiritual program. On page 59, we will find the first of several prayers, one or more for each and every step, from step 3 through step 12, which reminds us that the God of our understanding is the source of our recovery. We learn to invite Him to be the solution to all our problems. On page 62, we are told what the real problem is: selfishness, self-centeredness. But we can never see it without some method of revealing the truth to us. So we make a decision to do precisely what our sponsor tells us to do, and announce that decision in a prayer as presented on page 63. One of the beautiful things about the Big Book is that it will tell us when to take a step, how to take a step, what the results or promises of having taken the step will be, and provides us with the prayers that make certain we are inviting the God of our understanding to be very involved in our recovery. The last sentence on page 63 tells us that we now have to get busy and take the rest of the steps. Steps 4 and 5 are diagnostic steps to learn if what they told us on page 62 is true for us. The clear-cut directions for step 4 are found on pages 64 through 71, and there are 5 prayers for step 4. On page 75, we find the clear-cut directions for step 5 and the 2 fifth-step prayers. On page 76, we find the direction for step 6, which is nothing more than a commitment to God that we will become students and practitioners of the rest of the big book. And there we will find the 6th-step prayer. On page 76, we will find the 7th-step prayer, which is to be prayed after we have told God we are going to do our part. Now please do your part in making me different. This prayer is the completion of the prayer we prayed on page 63. Also on page 76, we will be most pleased to learn that if we have carefully followed the direction in working step 4, that step 8 is all but a done deal. From page 76 to page 83 are the directions of taking the 9th step, and the 4 9-step prayers are there. Having carefully followed the path the first 100 laid down for us, we now have had a spiritual awakening or experience and have joined the first 100 as recovered alcoholics. The 9th step promises describe that blessed event. On page 64, we take the first action to recover from a seemingly hopeless state of mind and body. By the time we get to page 83, we have recovered. We have joined the first 100. We have been given the power that we lack to survive alcoholism. Carefully following the clear-cut directions outlined in just 20 pages of our basic text produces the miracle of recovery. We are now to start our spiritual growth, and that occurs in steps 10, 11, and 12. The clear-cut directions for step 10 are contained in the paragraph on page 84, beginning with, "We continued." A running start for learning how to communicate with God of your understanding is very adequately covered on pages 86, 87, and 88. And now that we have received the power, it is our primary job to pass that on to the newcomer God puts in your life. The clear-cut directions for sponsorship are contained in Chapter 7, but you won't find the 12-step prayer until you've reached the last page of the basic text. Ask Him in your morning meditation what you can do each day for the man who is still sick. There you have it. So utterly simple, yet so garbled in our meetings. I challenge you to be part of the solution and not be part of the problem. The simplest guide that I follow in working with others is, if it isn't in the big book, then they don't need to be exposed to it. If you are encouraged to wait until you have a better understanding of what our program is about, I have one question for you. How well did you like sex before you tried it? Well, you won't know a damn thing about recovery either until you've taken the action of taking the steps, precisely as they are given to us. From the Primary Purpose Group of Ocean City, Maryland, we thank you for attending our foundation meeting. Thank you for spending the time with us. And please take the actions necessary to see if the miracle can happen in your life. God bless.
Railroad Dick, Railroad Dan, Three-Finger Dave, and Smiling Sam were all way into anonymity. Good luck getting hold of me. Just a group of drunks, we're all the same. We keep it simple and we feel no shame. You don't know us, but we're glad you came. We're the people with no last name. Here's fully clothed Mary. Her life was a mess. Now she's partway sane and all the way dressed. Unlisted in the directory. On a first name basis with guys like me. Just a group of drunks, we're all the same. We keep it simple and we feel no shame. You don't know us, but we're glad you came. We're the people with no last name. Mike, Father Mike, Hot Dog Mike, at meetings every morning, noon and night. We're all so doggone anonymous. Good luck getting hold of us. Just a group of drunks, we're all the same. We keep it simple and we feel no shame. You don't know us, but we're glad you came. We're the people with no last name. Oscar, Bev, Phil, Patricia, Becky, and James. People with no last name.